the next step that the Mistry camp may seek? Would you just wait for the waiver application to take your next step?
Look, there was a waiver application which had been filed long ago. The point was this. An objection had been taken by the Tata Group that the petition was not maintainable. Our argument was that it was maintainable, but in any event, we also filed a waiver application. The idea being that if for any reason it is to be held that it is not maintainable, then we wanted the waiver to be allowed so that this could be proceeded with. There is a big change in the 2013 Companies Act, whereas under the earlier act, if you didn't have your 10% eligibility criteria, you had to approach the central government to decide whether to permit you nonetheless to maintain an action.
Okay.
Now the section has been amended, which specifically provides that if you are not otherwise eligible, you can still move application for waiver, which the tribunal in the facts of a case can decide and say, yes, these are people who are aggrieved, or the issue of law, issue which is arising is something which will affect the whole company. Therefore, grant a waiver and allow them to go on. So we had already filed a waiver. And in fact, when the maintainability issue was argued, the specific order passed that day was that it will be listed today for the passing of orders on whether it's maintainable or not.
Okay.
And tomorrow for further hearing, which means that what was said was that if it is held to be not maintainable, tomorrow the application for waiver will be taken up and considered. If, of course, it was held to be maintainable, tomorrow the arguments would have started on the main merits of the case.
Okay.
So this is a change brought about by the Companies Act, and in fact the waiver application was already filed.
Okay.
And has been specifically, now that it's been held not to be maintainable, is specifically listed for tomorrow.
Okay. Well, Mr. Sundaram, of course tomorrow's case can go either ways, but in case the waiver is not granted, what would be your strategy?
No, the question doesn't arise. Of course, it will be agitated, and this is likely to go on, this litigation. But the point of the matter is that the whole issue on the maintainability itself is a very important question of law, because there has been an amendment in the 2013 Companies Act, in and by which they have brought in the concept of class of members also. And therefore, the basic argument was for eligibility. Do you take into account the eligibility qua your class of members, which means 10% of your class of members, you're an equity shareholder, so do you hold more than 10% of the equity shareholding?
Yes.
Or do you take the entire shareholding, including the preference shares, which really may have no interest in the whole litigation at all? So our argument was you should take the eligibility from the class which is interested in the litigation.
Okay.
Not the overall shareholding, whereas the interpretation which has now been given by the tribunal is, no, it has to be a part of the entire shareholding, which includes not just one class but other classes. So it's an important question of law as to whether you can club together, unlike classes, classes which are basically different in many characteristics, in order to arrive at the eligibility. And that was the question of law being canvassed, and which question of law continues.
No, I take your point that you still believe that you have an important judgment tomorrow, and you still believe that you have
We definitely believe this is a case where waiver ought to be granted, because it satisfies all the reasons for the grant of waiver. We are hopeful that it will be granted, and let's see what happens.
No, all the very best for that, Mr. Sundaram. But I just wanted to understand from, our viewers would largely be people who are interested in the Tata Group stocks. So for them, in case the waiver were not to be granted, do you go to the NCLAT and then to the Supreme Court? Is that the way we...
As a rule, I never predict either an outcome nor the effect.
No, I'm not asking you to predict. I'm only asking you hypothetically.
So I'm not answering that at all.
Okay. All right, Mr. Sundaram. Thank you very much for joining us with your first thoughts